Hi folks, welcome. It's good to have you join us. My name is Rev Jon Roberts and I am the vicar just over there at St Stephens Church here in Southmead, Bristol. Today is Sunday the 13th of September 2020 and I'm going to do a short sermon based on a passage from Exodus and a passage from Matthew 18. This season we are following the season of creation, so there'll be a theme around God's creation as well. Anyone is welcome to join us, whether you're from this community or from anywhere else around the world. It's lovely to have you join us. Stay tuned. Cheers. So, this month we are thinking a bit about God's creation, thinking about the natural world that we live in. I think it's fair to say that one of my kind of biggest annoyances really is this idea that when we talk about the environment or God's creation or the environmental crises that we're currently living in, we mean something that's a bit far away. You know, it's out there in the countryside, it's over there on the African plains, it's out there in the deep oceans, and it's quite far removed from me, where I live and where I work. Or it's this idea that somehow the environmental crises that we're living through, they're important and everything, but they're not quite as important as things like the economy or jobs or our healthcare. The government, the Church of England, and many other institutions have all declared a climate emergency, not because it's something far away from us or something that's nice like the birds and the bees, but it's not really that important, such as our economy or our healthcare. They have declared a climate emergency because the environmental issues that we're talking about include things like, climate change, loss of biodiversity, but also things like air pollution, water pollution, the desertification of parts of the world, rising sea levels, the loss of topsoil across the world, things that directly affect each and every one of us in our lives. All of these on their own pose a threat, but together they are cataclysmic, both to ourselves, our communities, and pretty much all the communities around the world. The environment is utterly crucial to us, our lives, our communities, our countries, our economies, our jobs, and our human health as well. God's creation is utterly intrinsic to our human lives, from the food we grow, to the air we breathe, to the water we drink, to the land that we live on, and yes, to the birds and the bees that enrich our souls. As we look back throughout the Bible, we encounter God's creation again and again and again. The people live on the land, the people live from the land, and most importantly, the land and all that shoots forth from the land is seen very much as how God provides for God's children. God's creation in the Bible is seen as how God provides for God's children. God's deliverance for the people of Israel is very much centered around the idea of providing them with the land to dwell in and prosper for. The land is symbolically referred to as a land that flows with milk and honey, two kind of luxury products that are far beyond mere sustenance and that are entirely derived from the quality of the land and its biodiversity. Throughout the Bible, we also have many examples of how God is in control of his creation, and how his people are not in control of his creation. Think of the disciples being afraid in their boat on the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus coming out and sort of waking up and telling the storm off. Or think about God telling the whale to spit Jonah out, or the feeding of the 5,000, or Jesus telling his disciples where to put down their nets and hauling out a great big catch. And of course, this morning from Exodus, we hear of the Israelites escaping the Egyptian army by God leading them safely through the sea. The Bible is one long story of how God provides for his children from the beginning of creation right through to the new heaven and the new earth. How God provides for the most basic of our needs. Think of Jesus instructing us to pray, "Give us today our daily bread." How God provides a land for the Israelites with grazing and biodiversity enough to survive and to thrive. And how God guides his children through safety to get there, all because he loves his children so much. Just as God guides his children through turmoil, suffering and strife, like following Moses for 40 years in the desert. Again, God provides for their needs from his creation. Think of the morning dew on the rocks every day for them to drink. He controlled creation in order to keep them safe, such as leading them through the sea to escape the Egyptian army. The Bible is one long story of God providing for people through his creation, guiding them through it, keeping them safe. And of course, that leads up to Jesus. God remains active and involved in our world, in our lives, in our communities, in your life and in mine. Every time we breathe the air, we should be reminded that God created the trees and the plants which make clean air for us to breathe. Every time we drink water, we should be reminded that God created the mountains and the oceans and the cycles of movement which make clean water for us to drink. And of course, we also need to be reminded of how what humans have made, and which each one of us uses on a regular basis, pollutes these things for our brothers and sisters next door to us, in our communities, and on the other side of the world. This is at the very heart of the many, many different environmental crises that we're currently living in and making worse for our children and children's children. And this is how we are treating God's creation, which he has made for each and every one of us across the world and across time. In our gospel reading this week, we hear a parable from Jesus all about community. The parable of the unforgiving servant is a parable about community. I think it's quite easy to hear this story and think first and foremost about money. It's easy to slip into that mistake because money, finances, debt, repayments, banks, loans, etc. are so central, so core to how we view the world, how we live our lives in this day and age. And so whenever we hear money pop up in the Bible, it might be easy just to slip into thinking about it the way which our contemporary world trains us to. But it was very, very different 2,000 years ago. Money was far less central to society. Today, we get a job, we work hard, we earn money, and we spend that money to kind of identify who we are and to locate ourselves within society. What we spend our money on, whether it be a car, a house, clothes, jewellery, phones, holidays. What we spend our money on is very much how we define ourselves, and very much what kind of justifies our status in society. You show the world how good or not that you're doing by how hard you work, the kind of job you have, how much money you have, and what you can spend it on. This was very much not the way that societies worked 2,000 years ago. This parable and many of the stories that Jesus tells very clearly illustrate the worldview of the time. The worldview of the time was that you justified who you were and your place in society through honour and respect in your community. You justified who you were and your place in society, your status, through honour and respect in your community. An individual or a family justified who they were and their status by the family they came from and by how well they were respected and honoured in their community. And they achieved this respect and honour according to the code of the law, by being an upstanding member of their society according to certain social behaviours. To let a servant off their debt that they owed you was not how you earned respect and honour in your community. To let a servant off the debt they owed you would not earn you respect and honour in your community. And so in this parable we see God lowering himself in the eyes of the community according to the ways of the world at the time. God is dishonouring and disrespecting the system of social ranking and status out of compassion for his servant. God actively dishonours and disrespects the human ways of providing status to ourselves in our communities out of compassion for each and every one of us. We see this throughout the parables that Jesus teaches, as he teaches the values of the kingdom, and we see this no more than Jesus himself on the cross, beaten and dying for you and me, actively dishonouring and disrespecting the ways of the world at the time, the ways that people earned respect and earned status in their communities, because he lived the values of the kingdom instead. This parable is about community, a community based on the values of the kingdom, not the values of the human-made world around us today. And it's a way of doing community that we see mirrored throughout the created world, I think. Every human society, pretty much every mammal grouping, and indeed the ways that the entire ecosystems are created, mirrors this way of different individuals, often very diverse, coming together and living together in mutual symbiotic community. Living together in community despite differences. This is a core value of the kingdom that Jesus teaches again and again. And it is something that we see all around us in creation. A myriad of diverse individuals coming together to live in mutual symbiotic community. This is the way that God has created the world to be. We see it all around the world. We see it in our own human societies. We live community ourselves, firmly and inseparably a part of the creation from which we are created. And we do it because it is how God has literally created us to be. The parables of Jesus Christ, just like God's glorious creation around us, show us, guide us, encourage and invite us to live the values of the kingdom, not the values of the world around us today. Amen.